those just paths against us. It is not temptation, but let us deliver one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, and thine is kingdom, power, and glory.
Do I have to?
Are you ready? Alright, this one. Alright guys, just so you guys know, there's already a typo. So there's going to be a lot of typos on this thing. I don't know where it is. Doesn't really matter. But
Everybody's looking for it.
it's fine. Okay. So the title of the talk, if you read the email, which I do hope that you read the emails that are sent out by the hardworking people at Queen's Church. If you read the email, the title was How God Dealt with Failure and How You Can Too. Meaning that's something in the past, right? That means that God dealt with failure in the past, in the Bible, and how you can now deal with it. But I literally just changed the title right now. How God deals with failure, and you can too. Right? Meaning that failure, or failure in the way we understand it, happens all the time. Right? It basically happens every day. So, who's failed today? Raise your hand if you failed today. Today. Do you think that you failed today in something? Yes, no, maybe? You don't have to have failed, it's fine, like, cool. Maybe, I hope you didn't, right? Like, that's what we want. But many of us think that we failed today, right? We just, that's obvious. Have you sinned today? Yes. Have I failed today? Yes. But is it actually the same thing? We're going to come to understand if it's the same thing. Who thinks failure and sin is the same thing? Who thinks? Failure and sin. Think it's the same thing. All right. Mike, why do you think it's the same thing?
The Bible says, falling short of the glory of God. Sin. It's failure.
Cool. Good. I like it.
You want to do better than that.
Agreed. Now, is that failure? Failure can be sin. So my goal was to be a basketball player, and I'm not able to because I'm just not able to be a basketball player. Then I failed at that goal. Okay, cool. So I don't know if I disagree or agree with either or any of you. And I don't know if you guys disagree or what. The whole point of what I'm saying here is, by the end of this, we're all going to come out with an understanding of failure. Whatever the understanding might be different from my understanding of failure. Okay. But we're going to go to the definition on Google. Right? I Googled failure. What did Google say? Google said the omission of expected or required action. Okay? Meaning, what that mean? I require this action, it didn't happen. Right? Omission of the absence of the action actually happened. Now, is failure, when we think of failure, what do you think of? What do you think of? What do you think of when you think of failure? Yeah. Frustration. Okay. What else? When you think failure, what else do you think of? Is there like the word failure? What does it like? What does it mean? Like, is there coming back from failure? Yeah.
It has like a very permanent connotation to it.
Right.
But I guess technically that's not what it's supposed to be.
Right. Right. Exactly. Right. It has a very permanent connotation, right? Which I definitely agree with. I think failure. When we hear failure, that means there's no way this is going to happen. So when we say, I failed at being a basketball player, I will always fail at this. Always, no matter what. Right? And that's kind of different from sin. Right? Because when we think of sin, what do we think of?
The opportunity to get back up.
Right. Right. So Now, do you still think it's a sin?
I think that not all failure is sin, but all sin can be considered.
Cool. Who agrees with that?
Sarah said the same thing. Goals.
Yeah. You agree?
And
Say it again. Say it again, please.
that not all, cause if we're in the permanence,
Yeah.
realm, that not all,
Failures are sin.
no, I think that not all sin is failure. Yeah.
Not all failure is sin.
What was that?
Right.
Okay. Because.
So if I failed an exam, that's not a sin.
Right.
But if I cheat, that's a sin and it's a failure.
Right.
You didn't fail the test. You cheated.
Yes. Exactly. Trust me, I know. This is big stream. I graduated college. Yeah.
Isn't it the sin is you're receiving the mark in the eyes of God, whereas failure is more of like a humanly or worldly standard? Like I failed the exam, that's a standard set by your professor or whatever. But when you say you're sinning in the eyes of the Lord,
Good. What do you think? What do you think about what she just said? Yeah.
I think that failure also is not necessarily there's different degrees to all this, but like the whole Michael Jordan quote that Andrelli shared with me in the car about what was the quote? I failed. What was it?
It's a huge quote.
What's the quote? It's like I failed, I kept failing until I didn't fail or something. I messed up.
We hear those quotes all the time.
Yeah.
Agreed. So she's saying that failure is kind of like a worldly thing. Sin is kind of like a spiritual thing, which I agree. Which is this is how we perceive it. Now what happened with everything that we just said? How many opinions did we just have about this one thing? Failure and sin. A lot, right? Joe's counting. He's probably going to keep counting for a long time. So we've probably had about 10 different perspectives, right? So it's really based on your perspective, okay? What failure is in your perspective, okay? And that perspective ends up literally, you changing that perspective or you living in that perspective can change your entire life, okay? So I was thinking about this and I was thinking about how God perceives failure and how we perceive failure. Now, before I even switch slide, what do you guys think? What's God's perception of failure? Like, how does He take it when He sees people failing? There's a million accounts in the Bible of people failing. We fail every day, right? We're part of the Bible, right? Because it's ongoing. We're part of the next chapter. So, it's happening every day. And how is God perceiving this failure? Joe, what do you think?
It would seem that he always tries to give the person that's failing a way out or a way to come back from that. If he wants.
If he wants. I like that. That's important. What Andre just said, if he wants is important. Or if she wants is important. Yeah.
What if God intended for you to fail?
What if God intended for you to fail? Yeah. Is that a possibility? Wait, answer that question first.
like which failure?
What if God intended for you to fail in this thing?
So not like
Is that
failure of
possible?
sin,
No.
just fail.
We're not going to talk about sin for now, right? Forget sin. We're talking about failure, right? Whatever failure, like you're thinking about in your head, your test, your exam, your relationship, whatever it is in your head, that failure, did God intend for this to happen? Could he have intended for this to happen? Yes, no? Cool, yes? We're going to think a lot, right? Because we're all going to, this is what's going to happen today. So, yeah, were you going to say something? No, you were going to say something.
Yes, to a certain extent. I think it depends on the circumstances. So, like, if I don't study for a test and I fail the test, I don't necessarily think that was God intending for me to fail. That was me not doing what I needed to do.
Not study.
You know what I mean? But maybe something else that He maybe wanted me to fail at because it was going to bring me closer to Him.
Cool.
You know what I mean?
I agree, and we're gonna hit on a person like that, right? We're gonna talk about that. So let's get into perspectives, right? Some of the perspectives, I think, the way we see failure and you can disagree or agree, and some of the perspectives I believe God shows in the Bible that how he deals with failure, right? So, God's view on failure. In the Bible, he shows patience, right? He shows patience, kind of sum of all parts. So, like, he doesn't take account literally just one situation, right? Every single person here is judged on their own basis. That's why we can't judge, right? That's why it's not up to a person to judge, because God judges based on the sum of your parts and the sum of my parts and my upbringing, your upbringing, and how you were dealt with and how I was dealt with and what circumstances you faced and what did I face and all that different stuff. That's why we can't all be judged on the same scale, right? God has separate scales for each of us, right? So that's what I mean by sum of all parts. Patience. In failure, God is patient all the time. He's patient all the time until there's no time left. Right? So he's waiting. He's patient. Yeah.
I have a question. What do you mean by failure if you said we're not talking about sin? What is it?
Like, failure.
So
Whatever you didn't want to
no, that's a valid question because they said we're not talking about sin, right? But in her question, that's why I told her we're not talking about sin. Like when we're discussing that one thing. Yeah, it's now like because it's going to be a lot of the conversation is going to be centered around sin, right? And how we come up short. We're going to keep bouncing back and forth, right? And he thinks long term. When you think of failure, what do you think of? What do you think of when you think of failure? Everybody has a memory of failure in their head. What is that memory? Disappointment in what? In yourself for what? Good in what? If we go back here, omission accepted or required in one action, right? When you're thinking about failure, you're thinking about one action, right? Usually. Is that right or wrong? Yes, no. You say no. Go, tell me. What do you think about when you think of failure?
I think failure is like kind of a deeper phrase than just people don't wake up in the morning and say I'm just a failure just because like they failed a test or something. Like that's extremely dramatic.
Right.
I think people think of failure when it's like begins to compile and becomes like a list of things that you were able to succeed at. I don't do well in school, for example. I don't have fun with friends. I don't do this, and that. That's a failure. Like that's what personally, I mean, maybe for every person.
Maybe it's the term or like the way you're using it. So you use failure, that's a noun. So you're describing someone as a failure. Like, but I wouldn't describe myself as a failure unless I've consistently failed. So I've failed. That's more short term in my head. Like I failed this exam, or I failed to do this even though I told you I would. Like those are all short term. But but you're using the word failure, which means it seems a lot more long term. Like I have consistently failed when I become a failure.
I completely agree with what both of you guys are saying. 100%. But even in that one action that we fail, right? That one action we fail in, God is thinking long term. Always. He's always thinking long term in our life. Right? So, a lot of time in failure, or when we fail, we give up. Right? We give up, or we're thinking in a short-term basis, we're thinking about this one action, or we're thinking about this one result. And don't get me wrong, that one action has consequences. Right? You fail a class, you go to summer school. Right? You mess up one time, you do one thing, there's a consequence. Right? Many things that one action could have a consequence. You're right. But the difference between us and God, he is always thinking long term. And a lot of time, many times when we describe failure, when we describe this concept, we're thinking about this one action, this short-term problem that we're having. So we see that God deals with failure many times in the Bible, right? So when we get to the Bible, give me a couple of examples of God dealing with failure in the Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, whatever you want. Yeah.
I forgot his name.
Good.
The one that had, I mean, it might have been Jonah. Well, Jonah, yeah. Yeah, it's Jonah. Wow. Alright, but wait, there's another one.
Elijah.
But Jonah and the Ninevites and how he tried to hide away from God. That's it, right?
Yeah, it seems to.
Yeah.
Good.
And then he like put him in a whale and was like, listen to me.
Good.
Jonah failed him multiple times. Like, you know.
Samir's really disappointed in me.
It's really bad. There's just really bad.
It's okay. Yes, Jonah's one of them. Yes. When Peter denied Christ.
Judges.
What else? Huh?
Judges.
Judges. Where? The whole time. Where?
kept failing.
The entire thing.
The whole,
Cycle.
the whole Old Testament is just a constant repetition of failure.
Cool.
Every single case from the beginning that Adam and Eve failed to the last chapter of the Old Testament, it's all failure.
Good.
Constant.
Now I'll give you another example, which I really like. That we never actually think of this story kind of like this. When we think about failure, we think about not doing our part, or not working hard enough, or messing up, or blah blah blah. Now, in this, the 10 plagues of Egypt, right? This is Moses, right? Why did Moses basically keep failing in his goal? Because he basically failed 10 times over. No? Yes or no? Did Moses fail 10 times over?
No,
No? Why?
because it's not his problem.
Yeah, he did his part, but Pharaoh was like, nah.
Ultimately, did they leave Egypt before that 10th time?
But it's not due to his actions.
Yes,
It's not because of him.
I agree. But it's still failure, right?
I think
In the definition of a failure, if I missed out, right, on this, I missed my goal, I failed. In the worldly definition of failure. Right? When we go back to that one action, or that one request, or that one goal, right? I did my part, right? How many of us have done our part over and over and over again? This guy did it 10 times. And he's talking to God every single time. And God goes back to him, go back to him, go talk to him, go do this, go do that. Show how many plagues, how many miracles were done. Right? Yet, every single time, Moses basically ultimately missed his mark. Can you raise your voice so they can hear you?
This is one of the instances where God intended on him failing because after so many different things that he brought upon Egypt, that it took that many things for the people to have to be able to trust him and follow him and really truly believe that he was speaking to God. So that's how I saw it.
Cool. Great. Mina, was this the thing you were talking about when you said God may sometimes want us to fail?
Not necessarily the scenario, but I think sometimes people push for a specific goal that they think is correct even in God's eyes, and sometimes they're unwilling to see the continual kind of like the door closing in their face. So sometimes failure is a part of God's plan.
Yes.
There is a difference between what Mina is saying and what Mina and you are saying.
Yeah.
You know, in the case of Moses, there is a third factor, which is fair.
Yeah.
Like in Mina's example, which I understand very well and I agree with it very much, there is no third factor.
Yeah.
But this is really God's planning the best for me,
Yeah.
if I can say that. Like in Hannah, it's because of Pharaoh and his hardening of the heart. That's why he didn't let the people go.
Right. But yeah.
Can I just kind of tying it in? I think in the third case, the one thing that I'm thinking of is like a career. So if you want to go do a career in a certain place, but for some reason you can't, you're getting rejections left and right. So I think the third factor there would be that door closing, what Mina was saying. So you're doing everything in your part, and you're a good candidate. You did everything in your part, but for some reason you can't get the job you want. So like that's kind of I think the third factor. And I think the one thing that I would change is the intending, like your question said, does God intend for failure? I don't think God ever leads you to failure, but I think he just if you're asking for his guide, is that your question? Do you want to say?
No, I
Instead, it's what I choose to do as a human outside of God's actions that cause me.
Wait, but how about
Like David, for example. David was set up for success, promised by God. Out of his own actions, he chose to fail.
yeah.
You know, like so. I don't think God put her bathing in the garden for him to fail. You know what I mean?
Wait, can I flip that?
No, wait.
Okay, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't God's will like total will for all of us to get to heaven, right? Like God wants to save all of mankind, right? So God's will, when we say, please God, let this be according to your will, His will is for us to be saved. So whatever our path is, because God knows whether or not we're going to do the thing that is good for us or not, whether or not He needs to let us fail in order to be successful in the end. Like it's all for His own glory, just like Moses needed to fail, maybe not necessarily for his own salvation, but for the salvation of all of Israel, right? Like he had to fail, and he had to, you know, make Pharaoh's heart less soft or whatever, but all of it is to get to heaven. So whether or not that means we have to fail to get there is, you know, in God's plan.
Okay, so I'm going to take both situations and show you why Moses probably kept going in these 10 times and why a lot of people are so stubborn in their own mindset, right? So he chose the example of a career, right? When you're going for a career that you may not be right for, but you keep going at it, right? I failed the same test over and over and over again, right? But how do you actually know if they're still communicating with God? Is that person still communicating with God? Now, do you think Moses would kept going back to Pharaoh if he was not in constant communication with God? I probably would say 100% no. Let's say God told him, go to Pharaoh, put out your staff, he's going to let the people go, and he didn't let him go. Do you think Moses is going back there if he's not talking to God again? Probably not. Right? So in failure, right, or in struggle, because I think those two are a lot more similar, failure and struggle. In that, literally what gets us through is Christ, right? That's what made him ultimately get out, right? That's what made all those miracles happen. Yet, mind you, the Israelites still, at the end of all that, got out, left, went to the promised land. Still, nothing. Still left God. And we're going to get to that at the end. That's why I bring it up. So why did God save Israel? Somebody pull out that verse, please. Exodus. Whoever has it, just read with a really loud voice, please. God, Exodus 6, 2 to 7. There's a couple seats up here, guys. You got seats up here if you want. All right. Who has it? Go, loud.
And God spoke to Moses and said to him, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, Lord, I was not known to them. I have also established my covenant with them, to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their pilgrimage, in which they were strangers. And I have also heard the groaning of the children of Israel, whom the Egyptians keep in bondage, and I have remembered my covenant. Therefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will rescue you from their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians.
So in those verses, right? What do you find out? God's talking to Moses, and he says, I'm the father of Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, all these people, and I presented myself to the Israelites, and they did not accept me. But I made a covenant, and I told them that they will get the promised land. So I will fulfill this covenant. I will fulfill my promise, right? And I will get my people out. I will get them out. I know that they didn't accept me. I know they didn't hear me, but I made a promise that I'm going to get them out. So, why we bring that up? Because every single one of us has this promise. And every single one of us, at some point, or maybe right now, don't know God or hasn't really accepted fully. Yet, that promise is still there. Right? That's why it will always be there. Always. It's always going to be there. Right? Because he promised it. So if we accept it, if we struggle, it's always there for us to take it. It's just, are we going to actually take it? Right? Even if he leads us out, how many struggles, how many times have I failed and we struggle through with God? I get to the end, I cross the Red Sea, and then after, it's like, I'm good. Now I'm back. Basically, most of our lives, right? Kind of like that. But it's ultimately, when are we really? I knew you. I accept you. I gave you my promise. It's still there and I will lead you out. But are you going to actually take it? All right. Next example. Disciples before the crucifixion. Right? This is the Last Supper. Magnificent picture. Beautiful picture. They're eating, they're drinking with Christ. Right? They're doing the first communion ever. Right? Literally 3 years of ministry with Christ, seeing miracles, excited. They have a mission, they have a goal, right? They're going to spread the word of Christ. This is the Messiah. Let's spread his name. Let's do all this stuff. Now, this is a really nice picture, right? And then Christ dies. Okay? He gets crucified. And what do all the disciples do? Yes, they did. Hard. Mad hard. Right? They just bounced. All of them. Right? Except for Peter. He's like, I'm not dipping on my man. Right? That's my dude. I did everything with him. Right? I'm going to go with him. I'm not nothing. Right? We all know the story. He goes and he fails. But he doesn't fail once. He fails 3 times. Right? He fails 3 times. Right? And now, after the failure, now the master's dead. He's crucified. He's not here. Now, where are they? Now what happens? They all leave. What happens now? Yeah. Yeah. Right? Or they all started like, all right, we all got to get it out now? Like, should we all just get back to what we were doing? Is the mission over? Is it done? We saw all these miracles. He did all this stuff. All this stuff happened and we were with him. And we did miracles and we raised the dead and we did everything. And yet, still, fearful, scared, right? Terrified. But they were terrified, not because necessarily the master's dead, but they never imagined that because he was the Lord, he was God. But now he's dead. And the past 3 years, kind of in their head, it's like, was that a waste, right? Right? So this is the disciples after crucifixion. Somebody put out that verse, John 20:19. Somebody read. Yeah.
Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in the midst and said unto them, Peace be unto you.
Yeah. Keep going.
And when he had said so, he shewed unto them his hands and his side. Then were the disciples glad when they saw the Lord.
So, do you think the disciples failed him or not? Who thinks the disciples failed God? People in the back, do you guys think the disciples failed God? Yes or no? You think he failed them, right?
Of course, they all deserted it. They denied. They were scared. They ran for their lives.
Cool.
They were just weak humans.
Who thinks that they didn't fail him? No, not yet.
When did
What?
when
Okay, when did they fail? Yes, Ronnie, you say something.
No, I was just saying. I don't think.
Wait, you don't think they failed him?
No.
Okay, why?
Because I think they just weren't expecting it and they were just doubting it and they were waiting for something. Like they weren't sure what was going on. I don't think they really understood the full capacity of what was happening, which they are not supposed to. Like none of us.
But didn't he say I'm gonna raise from the dead on the 3rd day?
Yeah, but I don't know, like I
do you think that they had?
They had no idea.
I think they had an idea.
They had no idea what he was talking about. When he
But
He
is
said
that-
it bluntly. He said it
He did.
bluntly, but-
Of course, I agree with you.
It said, and they had no idea what he was talking about. I'm serious. You're like, what the heck are you talking about?
$100.
No, not at the Last Supper. I don't think so. But let's talk about that after. Do we think at this point disciples failed Jesus? Peter failed Jesus 3 times at least, right? Now, let's take that one disciple. That one disciple fails Jesus 3 times, his closest disciple, like arguably his closest disciple, yet transforms that failure into what? Into greatness, into glory. Now, if they're able to do that, right? If we actually see Christ, right? If we actually understand Him, are we not able to basically do the same thing? So, my question is, what is failure really? I think that's failure, right? The acceptance of a life of constant choices that is lower than our expectations and the expectations God has for us. Who agrees? Who disagrees?
Can you say it in 10 English?
Yeah. Yeah. So, a common theme from what everybody was saying is that failure is not necessarily an action, right? Failure, Ebenhoop said it perfectly, right? He said that failure is not, I don't think of failure and I think of that one thing I did bad or that one test I failed. I think of a failure as a constant, as a life, right? I'm consistently failing. I'm consistently missing the mark over and over and over again. But that's not even failure. Failure is the acceptance of that. Right? If I keep missing the mark, right, every single time. Moses missed the mark 10 times. He missed it 10 times. But the acceptance at the 5th time, or the 6th, or the 7th, or the 8th time, that would be failure. But he didn't fail. Right? Or he wasn't dwelling in failure, he wasn't living in failure, because he never accepted it. Now, how many of us at some point keep accepting failure? I don't care if it's school or work or church. I don't care if it's a life with God. How many times have we just accepted, this is it? This is what it's going to be. I'm only going to be this. Or I'm only going to be a habitual Christian. Or I'm only going to live an average life. Yeah.
So when I read that sentence, I thought that, so our expectations and the expectations of God for us, I feel like sometimes those are two completely different things. So how do you, I guess what I'm saying is like, when you accept a failure, are you really accepting it if you believe that's not what God intended for you? You know what I'm saying? So like, for example, like if you don't get the job that you wanted, and you accept that maybe that's not the right job for you, are you accepting a failure, or are you just saying, you know, like maybe God has a different plan for me, so let me try and go a different way? You know, like.
So because you're saying that my will and God's will don't always align.
Yeah, but I don't think they a lot of the times they don't. So you can't say that like because you didn't meet your expectation, like you're failing.
Good.
Because you don't know that if that's like what God wants from you.
Who agrees with that?
And also, like, that's why I think what you said before about, like, communicating with God is so important, because you wouldn't understand that unless you, like, had, like, a prayer life and, like, were constantly communicating.
Nice. So what would you change it to? Let's define it. Yeah. Right now.
Just take out lower than our expectations.
I think what you intended was like, granted that your expectation got it.
No, but I want to define it. Because I completely agree with what you're saying. So I want to define it right now. So we're all going home with the definition that we all like.
Just take out our expectations.
Change it to mediocrity. Just change it to accepting mediocrity.
I think what she said is exactly right, but I still think like what you're saying is even if like you decide, okay, this is not working, maybe there's another path. That point when you face that and then automatically go to
So do we have to change it or not? That's the bottom line.
No, we're good.
All right, I'll put it on the life and I'll change the entire definition. That's fine. Who else was raising their hand? Someone? Yeah. Yeah, Vic. Vic.
It's just the statement that you made is you can't assess failure by aligning your goals or aligning your efforts to meet the goal of an expectation someone else set for you. That is not a failure unless you choose it. So the only thing I would change with this is the acceptance of life of constant choices that is lower than the aligned expectation of God with my own expectation.
Can you go change it? It's okay. Just tell me what you said.
I forgot.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah.
But I don't necessarily agree with that because I don't think, like, my definition of failure in terms of like schoolwork or career-wise or whatever might not be like my spiritual. Like I could be constantly trying to live my life for Christ, but when it comes to schoolwork or when it comes to being lazy, I'm really good at being lazy, and so I accept being mediocre and not really striving and just kind of like.
You know why we keep failing in spirituality? Is because we separating the two. And it's not separate. Right? Because whatever I'm choosing here ultimately affects this every single time. I don't care what anybody says. Sorry. Literally, whatever I'm choosing in my career, in my life, then affects my spirituality. It goes hand in hand. Because what happens is, I'm going to live this life here, in my career, in my life, and now I'm going to live this life here. Right? With Christ. Right? I'm going to go to church, I'm going to do... What is happening?
I'm waiting for Vic to come to the thing.
Anyways, so so that's the issue, right? It's because we're not. The whole point is we're not communicating, right? Failure happens because we ultimately don't communicate. We miss the mark of Christ, right? And then ultimately we miss His expectations. But that goes throughout our entire life. All right, we're gonna move on. So this is what happens when we allow failure to occur. Okay? When we struggle. All right, I'm gonna read it because it's fun. And you guys might have read this before. Okay? This is like an awesome story somebody sent me one time. I posted it on Facebook. A man found the cocoon of a butterfly. One day a small opening appeared. He sat and watched the butterfly for several hours as it struggled its body through that tiny hole. Then it stopped as if it couldn't go further. So the man decided to help the butterfly. He took a pair of scissors and snipped off the remaining bits of the cocoon. The butterfly emerged easily, but it had a swollen body and shriveled wings. The man continued to watch it, expecting that any minute the wings would enlarge and expand enough to support the body. Neither happened. In fact, the butterfly spent the rest of its life crawling around. It was never able to fly. What the man in his kindness and haste did not understand, the restricting cocoon and the struggle required by the butterfly to get through the opening was a way of forcing the fluid from the body into the wings so that it would be ready for flight once that was achieved. Sometimes struggles are exactly what we need in our lives. Going through life with no obstacles would cripple us. We will not be as strong as we could have been, and we would never be able to fly. Right? So, what Mina said in the beginning, that God allows us to go through struggle and failure and makes us get stronger in the cocoon, right? He makes us get stronger earlier rather than later. Because later on, you're not going to be able to fly if you don't actually get through those struggles here, right? I'm not going to be able to fly if I'm not constantly struggling, if I'm always taking the easy way out, right? If I'm settling every single time. I'm settling because settling is so easy. Settling is what I'm best at. I'm so good at settling. but I'm not. Like, I can't do the whole, I'm going to struggle out, right? But somebody can come, open it for you, and you can stay crippled your entire life, right? That's the same exact thing with the Bible. It's the same exact thing with prayer. That's fine. Don't struggle with God when you're younger. But you just expect, like, later on, somebody's going to be like this, and you're going to fly with God. Not happening. Ever. Not happening. Right? Because what we need to be doing is struggling. We need to be struggling every day. We need to. Right? We need to be able to just throw away all the distractions. We need to be able to do this. Because later on, when we think that, okay, God, I'm ready to take off with you, I'm going to be stuck to the ground. I'm going to be crawling. I'm going to be crippled. I don't want to get anywhere crippled. I don't want to get anywhere struggling. Whatever you're going to do, just do it really big, right? If you're going to be with Christ, do it big. Right?
I like this.
It wasn't mine. I found it online. It wasn't mine. But after all that, right, we can get really, really inspired, and we can go out and we can cross the Red Sea with Christ, and we can struggle with Him, and we can do all this stuff, and ultimately we can end up with the Israelites, right? We can end up like that. Now, this is a really poor graphic, right? Because I made those lines myself, and they're not straight. It really looks crippled, but it's fine, right? These are the outcomes of failure, right? Failure, you have consequences, right? You have consequences and you have glory, right? But ultimately, they still end up in choice. Oh, right? When I fail, I have a consequence of my failure. I failed my exam, I'm failing my class, I'm going to summer school, I may not be able to be whatever, right? I'm not going to be a doctor, I'm not going to be a lawyer, I'm not going to be whatever it is, because ultimately this is the consequence, this is life, that's it, it's okay, it is what it is, right? Nick, the guy with no legs and no arms, he didn't actually have a choice, right? It's a consequence of what? The eternal sin. That's what the consequence. He got the consequence of the eternal sin. But his choice was to make his life and the struggle about Christ. That's his choice, right? In anything we do, we always have choices, every single time, right? I can either deal with this failure in a positive way, or I can deal with it in a negative way. I can blame God for all the disaster that happened in my life, or I can thank Him. I can understand that ultimately He has a long-term plan for this. Right? Same thing with glory, though. Right? I can fail, I can work really hard to succeed, and I can get all the glory in the world. Right? But then, what happens? The devil starts playing around with me, he gets really excited, he gets me really excited, and now all the glory is mine. It's because I struggled so hard every single day, and now I'm able to succeed because of my own will. Right? And that's my choice. So we can get out of anything, right? But if we forget why we got out, and if we don't actually keep recommitting after we're out, then we end up not knowing it. Yeah.
I think a very good example is back in I think St. Paul's goal was to preach in Rome. Ideally, that's what he wanted to do. And instead, he was in prison. But in prison is when he wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. So I think he failed miserably in his goal to preach in Rome. But his failure led to our Christianity.
Yeah.
So I think failure, like I said before, I think it's depending on your goal, mainly, is sometimes a very big part of it.
100%. Exactly. Because if we actually all start believing that God uses all our circumstances for His glory, He actually will. Like, that will actually start happening in your life. That's a thing. Like, He will actually start doing that. Right? But we don't actually kind of like believe that. Like for St. Paul, even in his books, he writes, I persecuted the Christians. I did this, I did that. And now I'm one of the greatest apostles because only through the glory of God. Right? I boast only through God. I boast only through Christ. Right? Our boasting needs to come from Christ. Every time. But all the circumstances we have in our life ultimately led you to this point. You are here because of all the things that happened to you. Right? But right now, you have that choice to go wherever you want to go. Wherever God wants you to go. Yes.
So I agree with everything that's been said. Just like a way for me to understand what's the head of the topic is like when we learn to differentiate between when it's actually my failure, something I can change, like failing the class, for example, and when God not intended for me, because I don't think God intends for everyone to fail, but when He puts you in a path that maybe you should succeed at, like that maybe it doesn't work for you. Kind of thing. So how am I going to be able to differentiate between, oh, I can't do this not because God intends for me not to.
So because I'm supposed to do something else.
Yeah, because it's my own weakness. And then when God actually wants to push me in a different direction.
Okay. Who has an answer?
I think that's a very difficult question, and it's being asked. I ran into this question last Monday. It's a very common question. I think, and I don't know if you're gonna like my answer or not, but I think when someone is in a close relationship with God, he's gonna have this kind of peace about one of the two situations. Peace and know that's really God's intention for me not to go into medical school but to be a lawyer. Okay? There is a peace that's going to be generated to accept what's going on in my life. Or there's going to be, because I'm close to God, there's going to be this feeling that no, try one more time, take the MCAT again, or take the PCAT again, or take whatever. Okay? So there is, if I have this relationship with God, there is going to be a sense of peace toward one of the two attitudes that we just discussed. It's not like that.
Who else has an answer? Yes, go.
I understand some of your sentiment that you may not like that answer, and like I've experienced that myself because I feel like we are always looking for whatever is the shortcut, and it kind of goes back to like the simplistic thing that we say in Sunday school where we look to God as He's our genie, and we just want to see like where we're going to go and how He's going to get us there, and then like sure I have a relationship with God, but I mean it's true, like we can't like be here and say like I need to like have comfort with whatever happens and show me which one's right for me and which one's not, and He's standing there saying I'm right for you, be with me and you'll understand. And like it's definitely not the short answer, it's definitely not the easy answer, but I feel like that's the only one that's like accurate, the only one that's actually useful.
Man.
Again, sorry, if you're trying to be a doctor and you fail miserably in all science classes and you fail miserably in your MCAT, it's very clear what God doesn't want you to be there. And Victor knows, I don't know, not about you, no. I don't know you guys if you know Maggie Sharafi, he's now in his late 30s. He was dying to be a physician and he failed miserably many times in his MCAT. Now he's a very successful lawyer. So God will there is no point. There is no point of banging your head in the wall and insisting on something. You do your part, you try once, twice, 3 times. If it doesn't work, God is closing the door to probably open another door. Like being stuck in something that this is what I want and this is the best for me, I don't think this is the right answer.
Man.
I don't know if this applies to all situations, but I feel like there are times where when you can't tell if this is a failure for me or if it's like I personally a failure or it's just not my God's will for me, I think it becomes a fine line when you feel like you haven't done your part and that God did the rest. So like if you can comfortably feel like you did your part and God did the rest and it didn't work out, then you take comfort in that is a failure. But when you didn't do your best and you know that you could have put in more work so that God can bless whatever it is that you're doing, that's when it'll feel like your own personal failure or you think God.
So, Nirvana, do you want to say something?
I was just going to say,
person will try 40 times before he changes, and another person will try 3 times before he changes. And I think for every person it's different depending on where you are.
So I think my
No.
yeah
No.
no go go.
It's easy to get off topic, but I want to stay on topic with shining a light on him and what you're asking, whatever everybody's saying, right? It's the realization that life is not a process. You don't get processed through school and through these different institutions for an outcome that's guaranteed. Life is a journey. Our walk with Christ is a journey. Everything counts. Perspective counts. All of it counts. Which is why the decision over there is failure. It's either consequence or glory for God, and it's always your choice. It's a journey. And in modern day where everything's about processes, and I'm in manufacturing, so that's all I do, right? Optimizing processes. It's easy to try to apply that lifestyle in these success books to your life, but then you forget how to grow and how to go on that journey through it.
Listen, at the end of the day, I personally don't think that God cares what you're gonna ultimately do with your life. Our end goal is to get to heaven and bring as many people there as possible. Now, what are your skills and talents to get you there and as many people there as possible along the way? That's the question. That's the question you should be answering. And that's what's going to help you decide what you need to be doing, right? If you don't have the skills or talents or whatever to go and do a certain occupation, it's whether it's right for you or not, whether you want to try it out or not, fine, that's your business. But at the end of the day, your goal is to be with Christ and bring people to Christ. That is your goal, right? Align those two, your worldly career with being with Christ, and you're going to find your answer to whatever you want. That's all I have to say. Does anybody have anything else to say?